All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? So welcome everyone. Attendees are still coming in, but we can start with our intros. So I'm going to start with myself and then I'll give you all a little bit more involved intro prompt. And we'll have Suchi go as well. So I'm Olivia, she, her pronouns. I am a PhD candidate at UT Austin, and I'm also co-chair of the climate change committee of Astrobites, where I've been an Astrobites writer and co-chair for the past couple of years. This is our second Earth Week event, and we're really excited today to be focusing on this topic. Our theme for the week, and specifically for this panel, is how to talk to people about climate change, specifically from the perspective of science-engaged folks. So how do we as educators, students, scientists, just science enthusiasts in general, talk to people about climate change? And we're coming from the perspective of, for me, astronomy and science communication, climate communication, but we have this incredible lineup today of speakers from interested and engaged in this topic from various backgrounds. I'm really excited for the discussion today. We're really leaning into our platform as a science communication platform, thinking about this theme of how to talk to people about climate change. And Suchi, do you want to introduce yourself once again?
Hi everyone, I'm Suchi Garanan, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Hawaii, but I'm now based at the CFA doing experimental work. I am also the co-chair of the climate committee here at Astrobites, and I'm also part of the AAS Sustainability Committee, so that's been a recent development since the last Earth Week, which has been really great. And yeah, I'm really excited to hear what all of our wonderful panelists have to say.
Awesome. So I will be moderating the panel and Suchi will be live tweeting. And so I'm going to start with our intro questions, a little bit more involved than what we gave ourselves. Beyond just introducing who you are and what you're up to, I welcome each of the panelists to describe your journey as a climate communicator and what sorts of communication, audiences, formal and informal training, etc. you've had. And I think we should just popcorn. So let's start with Shannon. Then you can call on the next person.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Shannon Schmoll. I am at the Abrams Planetarium at Michigan State University. I'm also in leadership roles for both the Great Lakes Planetarium Association and the International Planetarium Society. I would consider myself somewhat still new in the world of climate science communication. I think it's a really important topic. It's one that I try to sprinkle in a lot of different things that I do, but I work in a planetarium. We're still talking about space. And so I think a large part of that is situating the Earth and where we are within the universe, and sort of reminding ourselves that we are on a marble that we need to take care of because we don't have any backups. There is no planet B, right? So in terms of my training, my background is very much in astrophysics and informal science education. So I did a joint degree in astronomy and education. My research is on informal education around planetariums, and I also have a background in museum studies. So when it comes to climate communication or climate science specifically, I don't have a lot of formal training, but I have been working on more grants and projects along the way, learning from my wonderful colleagues who do know a lot more, some of you who you've probably heard from this week, like Martin Starksteek and Ryan Wyatt. So it's sort of expanding that. I've also been, I just finished up participating in a program for science educators to learn about ecology and conservation efforts down in Chile in a remote nature preserve in Patagonia. And so that was about a 2-week-long program where I was able to really experience firsthand what a healthy ecosystem should look like. And I think that's going to help inform me as I move forward and tell stories and develop more programming. So that's me. Oh, I'm supposed to pick the next person. Gina.
Hi, thank you. And thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here. I'm in the Netherlands. It's coming towards the end of a long week, but I'm really looking forward to hearing some of your stories. So my background is in environmental science, and that's where I started. I did a PhD in Scotland, and as I was moving into progressing through academia, I was involved a lot in environmental communication and increasingly broader science communication. And while doing that, as you go through those kind of academic hoops, I was getting further and further away from the environments that I kind of started studying, becoming increasingly disconnected from them. So a few years ago, we had a bit of a personal experiment where my husband and I decided to live outside for a year and try and bring a bit of balance back into our lives. And in doing that, it started to make me look at things like habitat degradation and climate change as a symptom of a breakdown of our relationship with the natural world. And that's really been my focus since then. And during that year, I started at a position at an astrophysics institute. And so I started talking about these kind of topics with astronomers and seeing this real big world view, and bringing those perspectives together for me was really exciting, finding ways to kind of keep your feet in the dirt while having this real sort of global perspective on what is going on. And I am going to pass to Natalya.
Thanks. And yes, thanks for having me. It's really great to be here. So I am a professor at McGill University in Montreal in Canada. And I sort of sit at the intersection between climate science and geophysics. So my research works on understanding how the polar ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica are responding to climate changes, both sort of in Earth's deep history as well as into the future, and then how global sea levels around the world are changing. And more, how are we going to adapt to those changes, or how do we better motivate them being smaller? So I started out with a physics background in my undergraduate degree and took like an earth science course at the very end of that, and that got me interested in that. And then I went to do a PhD in earth science, earth and planetary sciences, and then that was sort of the path on from there. I think in terms of communication, it really started by just conveying the scientific research that I was doing. So that was sort of a comfortable place of you're the real expert in this thing and you're communicating it. And more now that I'm a professor, I'm really interested in educating and training the next generation of people to be able to lead us through this crisis that we're headed into. So I communicate to courses, both the high level graduate, undergraduate courses, as well as really broad courses. So I've been on the development team for a new university-wide course on climate change called the Climate Crisis and Climate Actions. That's really based in hope and helping people to find what they can bring to the table to take action. I also help to run international graduate courses that are really interdisciplinary. So bringing people together in a group, getting to know each other, working on research together and discussing in a sort of remote environment. So you really form connections to be able to take actions together. And then I also do sort of outreach activities, which used to focus more on just conveying science. And now I really try to get people talking to each other and thinking about what to do in their own lives, and also getting some science in there too. And I'll stop there for now. So I'll pass to Bernadette.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's great to see you all. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. My name is Bernadette Rodgers. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm located in traditional Chinook territory in the Pacific Northwest, known as Portland, Oregon. And I'm an astronomer by training. I was happily working at Gemini Observatory back in the late 2000s, I guess, when I was getting sort of more and more engaged and concerned about the climate crisis. And then I can sort of trace my specific start into my current path to an event that happened in 2009. And I like to tell this story because I think it's a perfect example of how we never know the impact that our actions will have on other people. As educators, you know, we all know that you just never know what kind of impact you will have. And so I can trace my start really as a climate activist to a colloquium in La Serena, Chile in 2009. As I said, I was working at Gemini Observatory at the time as the head of science operations in Chile. And I learned that John Lacey, who is an astronomer and was at the time the principal investigator for a SOFIA instrument, was pulling back from the project out of concerns about the carbon emissions. If people don't know, SOFIA is just recently retired, was a flying observatory for many years. And, you know, just hearing that, I don't know, it had a trigger effect for me, for someone to really make a career choice based on their concerns about climate emissions. That was way back in 2009. I now know lots of people that are making career choices based on the climate crisis, but it had a big impact on me. And back in 2009, it led me to organize the first environmental splinter meeting at the AAS in January 2010, which James may recall led to the formation of the AAS Sustainability Committee, which is still happening today, and eventually led me on a path out of observatory work towards what I now consider full-time activism. And I left my observatory job in 2014 and also left Chile. So that was when my family moved to Portland, Oregon. And now I'm a part-time adjunct faculty at Portland Community College and also at Willamette University. And also I've been taught at Portland State University. But I really spend the majority of my time doing climate activism. That's, of course, not always an option for everybody. I'm sort of late in my career at this point, but that's been my focus for the last, 10 years now, more than a decade. And as far as training and things go, I have had lots of, since I've sort of changed career paths, I've been to lots of informal trainings, climate justice trainings. I also had a formal training. I've actually had a few formal trainings with the Climate Reality Project. In fact, I just finished one last week on the Inflation Reduction Act. So yeah, I've just really sort of retrained myself without going back to school and committed my my sort of second stage career here towards climate justice and climate issues. And yeah, I'll stop there and I'll pass it to James.
Thank you so much, Bernadette. Wow. What an impressive bunch assembled here. I am looking at an email that I just dug up. Hi, James. This is from Bernadette Rodgers in June of 2010. This is wonderful news, and yes, I would be happy to serve. Thanks very much for including me. And the news was me writing on behalf of the AAS Council, on which I serve. At the May meeting in Miami just now, I proposed and the council approved that we establish an ad hoc committee to assess at a top level the AAS's environmental footprint, especially its greenhouse gas emissions, and make recommendations for next actions to reduce that footprint. So there it is, 13 years ago. And I thank you for reminding me that you had already been doing a splinter session before that. So bravo, and so impressive what you've done with your life and career. And I would say, so Olivia, you asked us to talk a little bit about our trajectory, and I like the way, Bernadette, you talked about this pivot point in your life, and I think often about a pivot point in my career here at Smith College, where I've been for more than 20 years as a professor of astronomy, and I'm not anticipating leaving that role the way you have, but I certainly anticipate staying very active in climate change advocacy. And I'm thinking right now about one moment in my career here at Smith where there's a sort of a think tank, a liberal arts think tank here at Smith called the Kahn Institute, where they pull people together from different fields and students and faculty, and they just meet over lunch once a week for a whole year, and no expectations. If you produce a product, fine. If you don't, fine. And it was specifically about sustainability. This is over 10 years ago. And one of my colleagues was a psychology professor here at Smith who shared her research and experience with what motivates people and what makes them make decisions, and how it is not about information. It is not rational. We think every decision we make is rational, but in fact, almost none of those decisions we make are rational. We're so social. We're so hardwired, we humans. And she presented a number of articles in psychology and studies demonstrating this to us. And to me as a natural scientist, most of us astronomers don't think about this stuff, or we're not trained in it. But here she was telling us, look, you, James, everybody in this room, we're all influenced by what we perceive as the norm. And we adhere to that norm if it's a norm, if it is presented as part of the clan, the group that you want to belong to, or that you do belong to, whether that group is your family or racial or religious or professional affiliations. We all wear these different hats. And so that was an epiphany for me. And ever since then, I've tried to convey that to my students and tried to employ it in my own advocacy and activism about climate, about dark skies, about transportation, bicycles, whatever it is that, I have a bee in my bonnet about. I try to harness the power of peer pressure, which is a subconscious thing. And I try to set the norm. So Olivia and Suchi, you're doing it right now by making it look normal to care about climate change as a professional astronomer. And I think, Bernadette, that's what happened. Maybe it's a flavor of what happened to you sitting there listening to John Lacey. Like, here's somebody you care about who's setting an example, and other people might not have had a conscious epiphany, but I'm sure it influenced them. And I think we're doing it right now by having this gathering and making it look normal to care, and making it look normal to make decisions, to devote time, to devote energy, to take a slightly different career path or a dramatically different one for protection of the climate and the environment, and to think about the cost of our flying Sophia or flying ourselves to a meeting. So I'm sure we all have much more to say, but I'll stop there, and looking forward so much to hearing what others have to say.
Let's pass it to Paul.
Sorry. Paul, how about Paul?
Thank you, James. The fact that 2010 was 13 years ago makes me feel extremely old, so thank you for that. Right, so my name's Paul Fisher. I represent the European Space Agency. More specifically, I work in the climate office, and we take satellite observations, create long-term climate data sets on a global scale to track the evolution over the last sort of 40-50 years. Those data are used by the UNFCCC, which I can never say, and appear in IPCC reports, etc., to influence and help understand climate change. my role is around the communications side, and that's to increase understanding of the role and results that come out of the teams and projects I work with. So I'll be trying to influence national policymakers, other senior scientists, and also the public and the next generation. So there's sort of like an educational theme that we come to. So essentially that's what we do. How the heck did I get here? Space is very physics, engineering related. I'm actually a biologist. I did a PhD, so I had some science background, and it was in an environmental topic. So there must have been something in my upbringing that put me in that sort of particular direction. Didn't particularly like doing science, no offense to anyone else. I don't have the big enough brains, and I tend to like the news articles rather than doing the hard science. So after my PhD, I ended up doing some sort of technical consultancy advice to businesses. Ended up at an environmental consultancy that did partly climate consultancy, but then got involved in the communication of those results and ended up working in a PR agency. It's called a career because it careers all over the place. I worked in science institutes, reporting science from the projects that I was working alongside to communicate those benefits to the public and to other scientists. And yeah, the opportunity appeared at ESA, and it was such a cool place that's where I ended up and where I am now. I had an epiphany around climate change around 2012. Epiphany's been mentioned. I was reading a book on holiday by a chap called Jared Diamond, a lovely read on holiday. It was called Collapse, and it was about how societies collapse, and a lot of the reasons for that were relating to climate change. I went on holiday to the southeast of Spain, and it was like going into the future. So nothing grew unless it was irrigated. Everyone was too hot unless it was air conditioned. All the water in the local reservoirs were empty, and there was obviously some political issues around water use because there was graffiti about water and golf everywhere. And on the coast there was desalination plants. I just had a child at the time, and I'd sort of decided then that climate change was the way forward for me. Right, I think those are the questions that I've answered. I don't know, who do I need to pass on to now?
Anna left, one more.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to press shut up, Paul, and leave it over to you. All right, cheers.
Me. Okay, last one. So I'm a physicist too. Someone else was a physicist. And I did cosmology. I did a PhD in cosmology. And I think I did it because I wanted my head to explode, to do something very difficult. But after that, I said, I don't want to be a physicist, or I don't want to do that. I want to do something. I want to do more things in my life. So slowly, because I still did a postdoc, I went into ocean science a little bit, because after trying other things, and that's where I got more into climate change, because climate warming is ocean warming, no? And that was my academic career in climate science. But after a little while, I said, I still don't want to do all the time academics. Can I do something a bit more useful to people directly? Science is useful, but can I do something more applied? And this coinciding with having a family that changes everything, and in my case, it changed where I lived. I did in this last 7 years, 6, 5, I don't know, a documentary about experience that I have with 100 women in Antarctica in a program, a leadership program, where I was trying to find where do I go now. I did a lot of, I helped a lot with education programs in Barcelona, where I'm from. I'm looking here. I wrote 2 books for children because I have children. So I started doing a lot of communication in a lot of different formats. So that's how I train myself. Knowing the public, knowing different ages, talks to moms, talks to children, talks to people that don't believe in climate change. My parents-in-law, actually. And these last 2-3 years, I've done more coming back to UPenn, where I did my transition to climate science. I've been working in trying to help advance adaptation, global adaptation, like kind of gauging a little bit from science to diplomacy, but global diplomacy. So now at this moment, I'm very obsessed reading, learning what is it that negotiators do. And I am struggling to understand that, but now I'm into that, but still wanting to do some other documentaries, a little bit in the middle of everything. But I see now that I'm starting to be old. So now I'm seeing that what I want to do is is anything that relates from science to simplifying, educating, communicating. Because someone said before, there's so much information. We just need to put it in order, simplify it, and talk between each other. It's maybe we don't need to create so much more stuff, no? Just put it in order somehow. So here I am.
Awesome. Okay, I think we've done all our intros. I'm going to hit you with a combo question next, getting into the meat of what we're talking about today. The first part is, what goals do you have in mind when communicating climate change? So it's kind of top level. And then I'm going to combine that with our question of, how do you encourage engagement in your climate communication work? Shall we go in the same order? I think Shannon first.
All right. I think for me, an ultimate goal would be behavior change, I guess, getting people to observe the world around them. I think this is true both if I'm talking very strictly about my astronomy education goals. I think it would be very similar when trying to talk about the environment as well, which is I want people to go outside and appreciate the world around them. So I want them to look up, I want them to look at the sky, I want them to look at the constellations, I want them to observe and notice things like where the sun is rising and setting and how that relates to the environment that's around them. But those skills can also transfer very easily to things like, do you notice when you hear the frogs at different times of year? When do you see the birds in your backyard? I've recently gotten very into birding. And so this is what I filter everything through right now. But I very much find that connection there. And I want people to use the same skills that they would in observing birds in astronomy and vice versa. And with the hope being and the goal being that people will start to notice what's around them. And if they can notice and make that connection themselves, that things are changing, that will hopefully be a much bigger motivator than me saying, hey, stop using this or stop doing that. That sounds very, I think, you're doing it wrong. And that can be demotivating for people for sure. And so if I can get people to want to go outside, want to make that connection, and then through that connection want to protect that environment, be it light pollution, be it conservation, be it using less plastic, whatever that might be, that's going to be my ultimate goal. I want to make everyone observers. I also generally work a lot, I work with all ages, but my primary group I tend to work with are the preschoolers to first graders. So that's sort of the starting point, I think, is getting them to go outside and start caring young. So I should put that context in there too. I love the preschoolers.
I really love hearing that from you, Shannon, because I mean, that's essentially where I am at as well. So my goal with a lot of what I do is to first get people to stop for a moment and listen to what is going on. And from a communication perspective, that for me is something that is really important. I think there's a pressure at the moment to think about, okay, how do we transfer this information to more people? How do we get them to, you know, to take it in? And actually we miss that part of communication that is the dialogue and just listening to what is going on. So I'm quite often taking groups a little bit older. So we're looking at sort of bachelor's, master's students, people who are just kind of starting to step onto the career path, and giving them the opportunity to really connect with the environments that they're very, very passionate about. Because what I see quite often is that passion can come from information that they're reading and from activism, but actually giving them the opportunity to really think about their place within the environment that they want to protect or preserve or to regenerate. And I think that can be really, really helpful from a communications perspective, to make that link and to get that understanding that you are part of an ecosystem. You can have a positive impact and you can receive a positive impact from it.
I think it was me next. Yes, I relate to both of what's been said so far. So I had, in terms of goals, 3 things I keep in mind. As a sort of scientist going into this, I aim for something I call grounded optimism. So starting from grounded in the reality of not downplaying what the magnitude of this problem and the complexity and the magnitude of action and change that needs to happen, but also trying to, from that place, find an optimistic step forward. It doesn't need to be all the way right away, but just starting in the direction that you think you can take, one step at a time, recognizing it might not be perfect. So I think sort of grounding in the reality, it's important to know that, you know, knowledge is power. Sometimes the devil really is in the details, and you need to get down to the really specific details of how is this one place that's next to an ocean going to adapt. We need to know about who lives there, what is the infrastructure, there's so many different details that you need to know. What are the processes that are contributing? How well do we know how they're going to change? But also hearing about the reality is really hard. And I think as scientists, sometimes we shut down the rest of ourselves in order to talk to people. So more and more I've been trying to make space for people to be whole people and have feelings, and myself included, sort of trying to push that boundary for me and sharing how I feel, who I am as a person, in addition to wearing a scientist hat sometimes. And then the other thing is empowering people to take action, to sort of feel that they have something to contribute. We need, you know, action at all levels, in all different ways, all skills, all people have something to offer. And so trying to, rather than me sort of talking at them at an outreach event, I've started to try to design a new kind of outreach event where people spend time talking in groups together and trying to help each other out, finding what they have to bring to the table, and maybe thinking of that first step they could take, like that day when they leave the session. And finally, that I think this comes to the astronomy connection for me, is what's already been mentioned, is the appreciation that we live on a planet, and that it's an amazing planet. It's awe-inspiring, there's wonder, you can be curious about how it works. I think that we often just skip over all of that and go right to, you know, talking about climate change is all bad and awful. But so I'm also part of the Trottier Space Institute at McGill, and I go, and I'm always sort of jealous of their outreach, because they get to sort of talk about space and everyone's like, wow, that's amazing. And then I get up and everyone's just depressed. So trying to allow for the wonder and for us to be people on this planet. It's not, it's a life, it's the reality of our lives going forward for the rest of our lives. And we still should be able to start from appreciating how amazing this planet is. And if we make space for that, we will make space for doing better to protect and change and adapt to the changes that are coming. I'll stop there.
Wow, those are all great answers. I second everything that Shannon and Gina and Natalya have said. Besides the students, the college age students that I work with, I talk to all different audiences from middle schoolers to, you know, rallies out in the street and big gatherings. And so I think it is important to know your audience and sort of set your goals for who you're speaking to. But yeah, just seconding what everyone has said, that we, you know, as has already been mentioned, we know that folks don't really learn, most of us anyway, don't really learn just from having data presented to them. So really trying to engage in what people care about, and, you know, meeting people where they are and finding opportunities to connect to their interests, to, you know, show them that wonder, as Natalya was saying, to make them and to, yeah, make space for the emotions. You know, it's I don't think it's helpful to just treat this like a science problem, right? The Gus Speth, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes here. Gus Speth is an American environmental lawyer since all the way back in the Carter administration. He's an author and an activist. And a few years ago, he said he used to think the top global environmental issues were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. He thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. But I was wrong, he said. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. So I think, you know, trying to allow us as scientists to be whole people, as Natalya was saying, and, you know, to really come into this with our full emotion and with our caring, and showing by our own action that, you know, we really do recognize that we are in a crisis and that we need to do more than just talk about it, but really act on it. So I guess my main goal in talking to audiences, besides that connecting piece, is to motivate action, to really engage people, to feel like this is something they can do something about, and then to help sort of show them the way. I don't think that our apathy is rooted in selfishness, really, but I think there is a lot of forces that lead to that apathy, whether it's fear, paralysis, misinformation, tribalism, politics, whatever it might be. And it's crippling. And, we just really can't afford to keep talking about this without really taking the actions that we need to take. We have this, we know the science, we have the solutions. This is not a technical problem. It's more of a motivational problem. And when it comes to hope, I think that's also where the hope comes from. I feel like there's a real cognitive dissonance when you're going about your daily life like there isn't a crisis going on or a climate emergency happening around us, and recognizing that and sort of bringing yourself in line with that in terms of your actual behavior gives you hope. You get to work with other people that feel the same way and feel like you're actually doing something. I'll give you one more quote. Rebecca Solnit says in Hope in the Dark, and probably most of you have heard this before, but hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch feeling lucky. It is an axe you can break down doors with in an emergency. And we are in a climate emergency, so we are in sort of a break glass and emergency moment. metaphorically speaking. I'm not advocating violence, but I do think that the more we show action, show by our own example, that we can get our messages across as much as by any words that we speak. And I'll stop there.
I guess it's my turn. You four are a tough and inspiring act to follow, and I could just say nothing. I'll add a little bit, but I am so appreciative for everything you've just offered, the four of you, and everything you said really resonates strongly with me. I will add two small things. One, just bouncing off of what Bernadette just said about, and following from Natalya about apathy and inaction. We astronomers, even though a survey I saw, you might have seen it also, you can find this online, the political leanings of all different kinds of fields, from artists to musicians to astronomers to blah, blah, blah. Astronomers are way, way, way on the progressive end of the spectrum. Like 99% are Democrats in America, for example, or something like that. I mean, the numbers are astonishing. And yet, most astronomers are not willing or enabled or ready to act and to actually do something with those political beliefs. So yes, I'm just repeating what you've all said, how to inspire people to action, give them the hope to action. And here I'm inspired by some things I've absorbed from the literature and other speakers and other motivating folks who have suggested that actually the action leads to the hope sometimes, rather than the other way around. It might not be that we have to give people a hope first, but that we have to just get them to act somehow, and that the hope comes from that. So that's one possible key that we might keep in mind. Another one that I just wanted to add, like all of you who've just spoken, most of my thinking and sort of cogitating how to connect is people to people, personal level, and that often sort of devolves, I'll say, to personal behavior. And yet at the same time, it's so important for us to remember that there are massive structures in place, global capitalism and our industrial military complex and our political systems that promote climate change and work against protecting the climate. And it's arguable that we'll solve the climate crisis without radically changing those systems. And I think Bill McKibben is pretty good, for example, as a motivator for keeping our eye on the big oil companies and the big banks and the big political systems that enable that industrial extractivist empire leaning world that we live in, and addressing the structural issues, and not encourage people to feel guilty, which I think we've seen lots of evidence is not a very good motivator. And all of us keep talking about the need for hope, and guilt is not really hope. And so all this is about personal feelings, but at the same time, what do we do to address the structural, deep inequities and unfairnesses and injustices that just keep rattling along? So I will just add that as another a goal of mine in outreach. Thanks. And now over to you, Paul.
Well done, James, for remembering it was me, and well done me for remembering I'm next. All great stuff. And we need to change behaviours to contribute to changing the way we live and the emissions that we produce. I have a slightly different problem that goes against some of the things that you guys have said. So I'm communicating a lot of the time to scientists. So scientists like the data presented, they like the hard facts. So a lot of the time that I'm communicating, say at conferences, is very focused on the facts. So I'm probably disproportionately fact heavy or data heavy when I'm doing my communications to the science audience. Then there's a big difference with everybody else, and that goes to the policymakers as well. So policymakers aren't interested in the detail, they're interested in the top line. What's the risk, what's the impact? So you've got to simplify your message straight away. So policymakers right down to public, I'm totally with everything you say. You simplify your message, use pictures to tell 1,000 words. I'll put a couple of things in the chat where we've used animations to explain complicated elements of the climate and how they're changing over decades and what that will produce, particularly around changes in the cryosphere, which might relate to some of the stuff that Natalya works on. When I'm speaking or communicating with the public, it's keeping the messages simple. It's telling them the hard facts, like, you know, that climate change is changing, that most of the news is particularly bad, that there is a massive challenge. Or almost when I do it, I have to be careful not to depress people. You know what it's like, you know, all the stats I could throw out or all the examples generally show that the elements of the climate are deteriorating. What I do though, then I'll pivot halfway through the presentation, and it's inspired. It's following what the IPCC do, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They'll lay out the evidence, but then, like in their most recent assessment, they'll say, but there is a message of hope, that there is a way of making the emissions cuts that we need and getting ourselves out of this particular problem. And then it lays out in detail. So when I'm doing presentations, I'll give them the facts of how the climate is changing from space, and that will be glaciers are all melting, ice sheets melt, sea level rising, etc., etc. But then there's a couple of examples that I use that are really nice. One of them is around ozone. So you'll all have heard the ozone hole. That was detected by Earth observation satellites. That led to understanding the problem in the Montreal Protocol that reduced your CFC sprays. And now, using satellites, we're seeing that the ozone hole improve. So it just goes to show we've got the tools to monitor and help get ourselves out of there. We're doing similar things with forestry. So countries can benefit from restoring and expanding their forests. So that's removing climate from the atmosphere. So we know that works. That can slow the climate. And we've got new satellites that are actually targeting human emissions so that policymakers can make sure that their policies are very effective is probably the word, but you can identify who the main players are in terms of pollution. Yeah, that's what I do. And I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to put a couple of things in the chat where we've had animations that explain complicated problems visually to non-experts and to policymakers. Right, so that's me. Thank you very much.
Is it me now? Okay, so I'm going back to the emotional part. My goal when giving talks is to make people feel comfortable enough to act. Some people are trapped in this, oh, I cannot do anything. So I just want to spark some hope there. But I was thinking now that ultimately my goal is to change systems. So I have an ultimate goal, but first I have to motivate them a little bit. So I am very honest about where I am, which means I show how I am that day, but usually I'm very frustrated with topics related to injustice, gender inequality, structural problems in general. So I'm very clear about that, but also I show them that there is a lot of hope based on this collective action that is happening now that everyone here knows, no? And it depends on the public, of course. For children, I do this thing of wonder and noticing things because that's what children, I'm meaning 7, 8-year-olds. And then let's go for a walk so that they start noticing what's good and what's bad about our systems. And then for teenagers, usually I start explaining more systemic impacts, how what you do, because they're so into themselves at this age, how what they do has an impact on everyone else. And then they started getting interested. And then I can show them tools for action, how to change their communities. There are like a lot of tools to do what's called social entrepreneurship. And basically I make them imagine the future after doing a lot of noticing. And then I tell them, okay, so how do we go to this future that you imagine that is actually different to where we live now? And so, yeah, it's a lot of exercises on how do we get there and what's the first step. So can you go now and do the first step? And this is an anticipation for the future that you want. And usually everyone leaves very, yay, we can do that. With this idea of collective always, like if it was a party, I sometimes even put music. And so, yeah, that's that's how I do it.
Awesome. I am going to propose that we switch it up a little bit for this next segment. So as you can all see, there is a Q&A that all the attendees have access to, and the panelists should also be able to see. So you all can be asking your questions and answering them typed up. And for this next segment, I'm going to propose that we just have more of an open discussion, so not going in order, and people can just chime in and also be answering in the Q&A. Everybody sees that. So I wanted to really focus on this idea of centering hope and encouraging action, and take that that nugget and thinking about this topic as it's a hard topic, it's stressful, it's pretty existential, and it can be depressing to be, as a communicator, to be engaged with it so much. One of the things that we think about in the Climate Change Committee, especially as an organization that is entirely composed of volunteers, we don't get paid for this work. We're just grad students doing this extra service work that we care about. One thing that we try to center is to hold space for eco-anxiety and that aspect of doing this work. And for me and Suchi in particular, it does hit close to home. We're both from California, and our parents back at home dealing with wildfires and these really direct and in-your-face impacts that we're thinking about. So taking all of that, boiling it down into a question, what I had already sent the panelists as kind of a combo is a question on facing challenges. So challenges in communicating climate change, and also as a climate communicator, if you could tell us a little bit more about your experience with this aspect of eco-anxiety and engaging with this work so often. So from the perspective of both a communicator and the folks you're communicating with, the challenges you faced, and if you have any advice for overcoming those challenges. And again, just anybody chime in, we'll not go in order this time.
Can I offer keep it fun?
Yes.
Olivia, you've heard me say this before, but here's an analogy that comes from a different hat I wear, which is about dark sky advocacy. If I give a public event or talk at a nature center that says, where the title is "Walk the Milky Way," and the description says, come listen for nocturnal animals, owls, and look for bats, and enjoy the magic of the night, and we'll do stargazing with a telescope, it's flooded with people, oversubscribed. If I say, come learn about the devastating effects of light pollution on the animals all around us, I get 0 people, nobody comes. It's the same place, it's the same audience, it's the same description, in fact, if you dig deeper. And I think the answer is people have crisis fatigue, and they don't want to hear more about the crisis. They want to love their life, and they want, I love what Natalya, you said about helping people, what everybody has said about helping people enjoy what's around them and appreciate the beauty and the magic and the wonderful and the mystery of the world, and that's the motivator. So I think that's the way around the depression. One way.
Can I jump in? Yeah, totally. And one thing that for astronomers, what I noticed when going from cosmology to oceanography is that people were more interested in me as a cosmologist than as an oceanographer. And I was like, why? This is because it's in the collective imaginary or something, like movies, something. Because have you seen the ocean? It's super amazing. I mean, are you serious about that? Why am I less interested now? So I try to find all these things that fascinate me, that I learned when studying oceanography. Say, no, but seriously, have you seen these stars that do this thing? And then people, yeah, no, that's cool. Okay. So yeah, you have to show them the cool things. Totally. The wonder. If someone is really, really, really already conscious about it, then it's when you start giving tools but yeah, first step, enjoy life and go out to the nature a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is an area where perhaps training and backgrounds as astronomers becomes really helpful, because I mean there's a lot of big problems in the world, and there's a lot of anxiety, and climate is one of many, and we've talked about like the systemic issues, but I do think that as astronomers, we are kind of used to peering into this huge vastness that is the universe. And somehow like that's still really inspiring and exciting to the public. And we can have those moments of like, oh, we're just a speck. We're just that tiny blue dot in the sky, right? And then, but we remember things like we've come together as humanity in order to figure out where we are in this vast universe. And that I think can help remind us. And whenever I have people feeling like very small and insignificant in the universe, I remind them of that significance that humans have and the power that we have when we work together. And if I tap back into that, it helps me feel better. And I think this is a similar situation. You know, we have a lot of anxiety of big problems that we need to solve. But if we can remember that we've solved bigger issues, like the hole in the ozone layer, like that is, I think, the one that Paul brought up. Like, I think that's a really good thing. We just need to remember that, and that makes me feel better. And then I think there's like, what about this individual action? There was that as a question. Everything helps. Everything does matter. Individually, if just I were doing something, it might not have a difference. But if everybody's doing a small little bit, it adds up. And also, what harm is it to try? And I think that's the biggest thing, is what harm is it to try? And if it doesn't do anything, well, we're no worse off. If it does something, then we did something. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, jumping off of this, what harm is it to try? That was a perfect setup for what I was going to say is that I've been thinking about climate action outside of doing my specific science as like running an experiment, where if you're going to communicate something, you tell a story and you make it personal, and then it sticks. So the best way to do that is to try to take an action yourself or gather some people together. So if you are astrophysicists, maybe you have you have all of these skills at processing astronomy data, and we need lots of data processing in climate, science, or to help with adaptation. So maybe take your skills and apply them to some problem. And then whether it works or not, you learn something and you have a story to tell about how you took a step forward to try to do climate action. And maybe you have an idea of what the next thing you could do is better. So really start with yourself, try the thing that you're trying to get other people to do. And then you have something to talk about. Whether or not it was the perfect step, it doesn't really matter. We have our whole lifetimes to keep taking steps in roughly the right direction.
I think, yeah, coming off of that, talking about taking steps, what I find really exciting at the moment is this change in language that you're starting to see. When I started out studying in environmental science, it was all around this idea of sustainability, and how do we look at how do we approach sustainability, and quite often that meant implementing what could be perceived as negative changes for a lot of people, impacting on their lives in a way that they didn't, that people don't necessarily want to do. But now what you're starting to see is this shift from talking about sustainability to talking about regeneration, rewilding, restoration. And I think that shift in itself is a really positive one, because no matter where you sit on that spectrum, there's always something more you can do. You can do more in terms of regeneration. You can do more in terms of rewilding. There's opportunities there. And I think that brings hope in itself, because it gives a place for that action. So I get really excited about reading philosophers like Donna Haraway talking about this shift from going from the Capitalocene into the Thulacene, and thinking about this movement of looking at the world as, a series of things that we're having an impact on, to looking at our relationship with the natural world and how we actually improve and change that relationship. That for me is a really positive step.
May I chip in after Gina? I'll start because I think you can hear me. So, I mean, climate change is the solution to it is massive and it's global. And as you probably gathered, from time to time, I have been quite gloomy when I speak to people. So often I get asked, the response I often get is, well, there's no point doing anything then. Because the challenge is too big. So when I'm on a one-to-one conversation with somebody, or I'm talking to a group, I say, well, no, every little bit counts. You can take those tiny steps and that will stop climate change getting worse. And I'll throw out one particular stat. So for every ton of carbon dioxide that each and every one of us emits, you'll lose 3 square meters of sea ice. There's a very linear correlation. So I'll ask them, well, how did you get here? And it's usually by car. So I'll try and take sustainable transport, and that will have saved 1.5 square meters of sea ice. Then I often get asked, what sort of things have I done? As well, I use sustainable transport. The last conference I went to, I saved a grand piano's worth of carbon emissions by taking the train and not flying. I eat veg. I don't eat meat. Those sort of things. So there's things everyone and anyone can do to contribute to the grand challenge. And I'll then say, this isn't the view of the agency, but you as an individual, you have the right to choose who's your government, and you vote accordingly. And if you think this is the biggest issue that you've got, you lobby your political representatives and you vote for the right people. That's what I think. That's not the view of the agency, and I'm going to stop there.
Can I say something? someone was asking, well, what you were answering also, how fighting against climate change is benefits the other things. I mean, fighting against climate change, the way I think we all see it is you have to change the systems that started a climate change. So that's the big thing, no? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it's not so obvious because people are still fighting against, like, I am from Spain and now there is a problem with water, but the problem with water exists even without climate change because we spend too much water. It's a dry place and we think we have the same water than Germany has. It's like, no, it's another place. It has less water. The system of water management has to change. And this is going to help with adaptation to climate change, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one example. But yeah, so when you fight against climate change, you're just going to the root. Well, not everyone, but I am always saying, okay, what's the root of the problem? So now you change that. Climate change, you cannot change it. It's no, well, yeah, you can absorb things from the atmosphere, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. So yeah, that's it. So yeah, it's totally related. That's my point.
The only thing I'll add, I guess, is that, I mean, there's so many good things have already been said, and I think it's important that our talks are that our communications are specific, that we give people examples by our own example and also by showing them what's happening, show them, you know, positive change, because we're inundated with negative impacts, and they're real and serious, of course, but you have to, it's harder sometimes to see the good that's happening, and so making sure that you show that as well. But I think more than anything, you know, as Natalya said and others said, that leading by your own example and showing things that you're doing. And then in activism work, there's something called the ladder of engagement, where, you know, you kind of hook people in, and then they tend to get more and more involved as they go along. And that certainly has been my experience. And so I think, you know, and I think Anna mentioned in the Q&A, the systemic change again. So individual behavior is important. It shows that we take responsibility for our role in this, but really civic engagement is where we're going to get the big changes that we need. And that's where people have the most apathy, I think. They feel like they can't, you know, they won't make any difference. And so showing examples of how the individual people do make a difference, showing examples of your own actions and how they make a difference, and then really helping people engage sort of wherever they're at, in whatever way, you know, doing one little thing. And then as they become more engaged and more involved, then they'll start doing more and start doing more. And it's probably been the experience of everyone here that kind of happens on its own once you get on the trajectory. And I think, I guess as educators, just really talking about it, you know, not avoiding this topic. It is the elephant in the room. It is the most important thing. And we can teach all this other stuff, you know, from our normal curriculum, but it doesn't make sense to avoid this issue, because this is, you know, what all of us are living and breathing every day. So just really making sure we don't avoid the topic at all. I don't know if we want to move on to anything else. I know Nick's asked a few questions, and one of them is about positive examples, and there are lots of them. Project Drawdown is one that comes to mind for me. Climate Reality has a lot of stuff, especially right now, in the United States, about the Inflation Reduction Act. So probably other people have examples too, that there are lots of information out there about positive things that are happening.
I was just going to say one thing about so that phrasing of fighting against climate change. So I listened to I was in a discussion session recently with Canadian elders who have come together with a lot of different groups across the globe to offer an Indigenous perspective on how we think and discuss climate change. And something that one of the elders said really stuck with me, and it's a framing of climate change that I had never thought about. And he said that when we give energy to a fire that we're trying to fight, we fuel it. So to make sure that when you're thinking about communication and when you're thinking about talking about this topic, putting your energy into the positive things that can happen, not focusing on climate change itself, but where you can make an impact, where you can make a difference. And that in itself can help to fuel change more broadly, and bringing in lots of different people to get involved and finding those stories that bring those fires alive. And I think that's something that's really important, not to stay in this constant fight, because the more we fight, the longer it stays there.
I think that's an amazing tie together of a lot of the themes that we touched on today, thinking about hope and the language we use and specific examples, how important those are. I think from the perspective of Astrobites specifically, a lot of our audience is engaged in some way in climate change and maybe doesn't know where to put that energy. I think that is an amazing framework to think about it, putting into the positive changes rather than being in this constant fight against. Suchi.
Hi, thank you all for such a great discussion. I had a question, and it was, I know a lot of you are super established in your careers, so you might have more of like a credibility talking to people about climate science, but I guess what advice would you give us who were in our early career, and this isn't something that's very mainstream in our departments, and sometimes people don't really take us seriously. So in terms of communicating as, I guess, grad students or postdocs or early career to a broader audience, do you have any advice to us? Do you have any, yeah, I would be interested in what you have to say. Maybe James?
Yeah, go for it. I think the fear is probably exaggerated. The fear of harm to your reputation and your standing in your department, in your field. And there are studies, in fact, showing that that scientists who hesitate to engage in politics because they fear it will tarnish their reputation as dispassionate, objective, rational scientists, that their persona as a scientist hinges on all of that, and that'll be jeopardized by them stepping into the messy business of human politics. Turns out it's not true, and that in fact their reputation does not suffer, and that scientists who have stepped up to the plate, they still lead perfectly reputable, productive scientific careers, and the ill consequences that people fear don't come to fruition. So go for it.
Yeah, science activism. I think we agree with that. I don't think I am not well established, even though I should be, according to everyone. I don't know if people take me seriously or not, but I mean, you shouldn't care about that. I mean, you shouldn't care. As long as what you say resonates with people, that's it. So you just have to find your point of what moves you, and then find where people are. When you're giving specifically, we're talking about climate action communication. I find that like younger people, maybe not younger, but astrophysicists that go into climate maybe do put a lot of data in it. And this has been shown a lot of times that no, like it's not data, it's comparisons, is feelings, is have you imagined that, have you? So for scientists, for me, it was traveling at the beginning, no, to start being like, woo, like more less data based, because I was told that science was objective, which is not true. No, then I learned, oh no, actually the north and south and the global north and south is also, it also told us how we have to live science. So what I'm saying is, if scientists don't take action, I mean, who's gonna do it? Like the rest of people are super busy. It's it has to be more of us joining the club.
I would say something I feel I've learned in the past 20 years, I guess, also kind of going off of a lot of these things is find your people, I guess. So I think you've already started doing that, but you know, if you're at a conference, go find the other people who are already talking about this. If not, set something up and see who shows up, and you will have a lot more confidence and a lot more motivation, I think, to do what you need to do. If you have that group with you who's going to be there to lift you up and support you in that work. And if you come across the people who don't get it or are trying to say terrible things or just don't believe anything, just, it's going to be really hard at first, but your work at not letting it bother you. I had someone complain about a planetarium show here when I first started. I was like, why are you doing that Al Gore propaganda? And it was like a very angry email. And I was like, oh no, someone's so mad at me. Oh my goodness. Like, and now, and like, if I get those emails now, I'm like, whatever. And it took me a long time and a lot of work on myself to get to that point, but work on that, I guess, knowing it's hard, but you'll get there. And again, find your people and they'll help with that.
Yeah, this is all great. Maybe just a really practical thing of like, give it a name, make it official and stick it on your CV. Like this is the kind of thing that people are looking for now. When you're applying for jobs, you have to go beyond just doing the research to other things. And so this can also feed back into supporting your own career path.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Natalya. And you know, I would add too that I feel like younger people have the moral authority on this issue, frankly. You know, if you're working towards trying to solve the climate crisis, you're on the right side of history. And there's too many older people that are reluctant or resistant or obstructing that for whatever reason. But, you know, science doesn't lie, as we know, and, you know, you'll be proved right in the end. The other thing I think we haven't talked about much today, and James touched on it just briefly, is the terrible inequities of climate injustice. And so, you know, using whatever privilege we have and whatever platform we have to help solve this issue that's going to be so much more impactful for so many people that have very little power and voice. You know, it's just the right thing to do. So I think that, and the more you do it, you know, like we've been saying, is the more you find other people that encourage you and support you and want to do the same thing. So I think, yeah, we should try not to let the naysayers hold you down.
The young people of today are going to be the established scientists of tomorrow. So 10 years time, which will go like that, you'll be in their position. And I'm old enough to have seen uptake of use of Twitter for improving science communication, and it all came from the younger scientists, and it was at the professorial level. It was all very sniffy. Now you look across the department and you'll find everybody and anybody is using social media. That was a bottom-up approach. I see the same with environmental attitudes, the reluctance to fly, the challenging what sort of food given in the like the departmental canteen. It all comes from the bottom up. So stick to your guns, because you're going to be that old professor in not too short a time.
Final thing I'm going to add, because I this is just perfect. In terms of finding your people, join Astronomers for Planet Earth. There is a group of people there that are doing incredible things, and the discussions are great, and they are really, really trying to make a change in astronomy. So please look to them. And if you're not already a member, join them.
And planetaries, someone here is in a planetary. I don't see you in that, but I don't know. Anyway, planetaries should have more earth science. Museums should have more earth science. Like I am into that now, going into like, why is it that there is only astronomy in science museums? Like, what about Earth? What about the oceans? So if you want to put some pressure on what needs to be changed in communication, that's a thing, because people go to science museums.
The planetarium world, we now have planetariums for planet Earth. We might have taken the model from Astronomers for Planet Earth. So there is a lot of push now within the planetarium world to have more climate science in what we're doing. So, but absolutely continue to advocate and push for that.
That ties in really well to our session on Wednesday. We heard from James hosted part of the session, and we also heard from Ryan Wyatt. And so at the planetarium at Cal Academy of Sciences in San Francisco, and I think he described it as like branch offices of astronomy, and we got to see a really cool visual of the Earth and Mars, and thinking about visualizing climate change in that way and how powerful it is, and how much reach planetariums have, and groups like this, and having these conversations and how important it is. So we've gone a little over time, and I feel like we could keep talking for hours and hours. Does anyone have any final thoughts, final questions before we wrap it up for the day?
Great work, Olivia and Suchi and everybody else. Thank you so much for your inspiring actions and examples and messages.
Thanks, James. And
thanks for being here and for
yes,
being part of it and teaching us a lot too. And the encouragement.
definitely. Thank you to the attendees as well for joining along in the discussion and participating. And of course, big thank you to all of our panelists for joining us. And we will continue these conversations, I'm sure. Keep in touch.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thanks
guys.
for tuning in, Earth Week 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you.